And we're back. This is Colombia Calling. I'm Richard Mccoll, your host here in Bogotá, Colombia. My esteemed guest is across the way in Bogotá as well. His name is Henry May. I can't remember how long Henry's been here in Colombia, but he's originally from London. We'll get all of the information out of him in the next 40 minutes. But Henry, it seems weird because I know you've been around here a long time, but it seems weird that this is the first time that you're on the Colombia Calling podcast.
First time, yeah. I'm a Colombia Calling virgin, but happy to be here.
But how long have you been here in Colombia?
I've been here for 12 years now.
Okay, so a good amount of time. The podcast has been going for 11 years, so we should definitely have had you on before this time. But then we never met in person until Eric Taboni, our mutual friend, managed to rope me in to go hiking up, is it called Las Moyas Trail, just pretty much above where I live in Bogotá.
Yeah, I mean, I can often be found going up Las Moyas Trail. I love trail running and hiking and all those things. So yeah, it's a nice place to meet someone for the first time. And since then, we bump into each other at the swimming pool.
Now we're at the swimming pool. You take your kids to swimming, where I take my kids to swimming and stuff. And so yeah, now we see each other far more often than we perhaps would have even imagined or organized. But so Henry, 12 years ago, let's start with and a lot of my listeners, I would say there are a bunch of immigrants here to Colombia, but the majority of my listeners actually are Colombians in the US and the diaspora, and also people considering coming to Colombia. And I just thought, how is it that you ended up here 12 years ago in Colombia?
Yeah, so actually, my story with Colombia was in 2009. I kind of lived in Argentina for a bit and then traveled around South America. At that point, Colombia was still a little bit off limits, and it was still kind of, people say, "Oh, don't go there, be careful," a bit dangerous. People still say that, right? But definitely in 2009, it was kind of a little bit of a kind of off limits. But I came anyway, and of all the countries in Latin America, Colombia was instantly my favorite. I spent 2 months here, traveled around everywhere, loved it, and kind of left a little pin in the map and said, I'll go back one day and maybe stay for a bit longer. And then in 2012, the opportunity came up to work with an organization called Teach for Colombia here in Colombia, an education NGO that I had worked with, the kind of brother or sister organization in the UK as a teacher with something called Teach First. American listeners might have heard of Teach for America. And the chance came up to come and work with Teach for Colombia and train some teachers in schools here. And I thought it would be 3 or 4 months, and I'm still here 12 years later.
So you were training teachers?
Yeah, training teachers in some of the toughest public schools in Bogotá, in the south of Bogotá. So my experience of coming to Colombia and living in Bogotá was instantly kind of very different to most foreigners' experiences. I was getting the Transmilenio, going to the south of Bogotá and visiting the tough schools in the poor neighborhoods, and I loved it.
Well, of course. I mean, also you're very tall. You are fair-haired. I think in 10 minutes of sunlight, you get sunburn. So you're going to stand out in South Bogotá, because I'd say that people tend to be a little bit shorter in South Bogotá. And so where were you, in places like Bosa or Kennedy? Or?
Yeah, Kennedy, Bosa, a school in Las Cruces as well, dangerous neighborhood in Candelaria. Yeah, and those types of places, visiting schools. And of course, when you walk past a classroom and 30 kids turn around and go, what's this guy doing here? This kind of giant blonde ginger guy in our school. So I had lots of fun experiences.
I believe it. So when you say you're training teachers, are you training them to teach English, or are you training them in almost anything?
So that in my first job here, I was training teachers that were entering the kind of the education system for the first time to become teachers with this program called Dinero for Colombia, Teach for Colombia. And And then, a year later, I set up my own organization, and we do lots of teacher training. Today, we've trained tens of thousands of teachers. Our specific niche is all around this thing called social and emotional learning, character education, developing the whole student, and this kind of wider gamut of skills that we all know are really important, but we're not managing to develop these skills very well when we're in school. Things like empathy and curiosity and self-awareness and self-control. So that's kind of what my organization today, Coschool, focuses on.
So this is Coschool, and this was born of all of your experiences all over and here in Colombia. You saw a gap in the market.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a gap in the market, but also I think I had a lot of strong personal conviction when I was teaching in London. One of my kind of success stories, a student in London that I had managed to kind of do well, and I managed to I was teaching in a very tough school, kind of the equivalent of South Bogotá, but South London. And one of my students that I really kind of pushed hard to get a good grade in his philosophy exam, a student called Colin, murdered someone when he was 15 years old and was sent to jail. And I kind of reflected on that and realized, well, I had been entirely focused on trying to prepare him for an exam and not prepare him for life, really. And so I started to reflect as kind of what was my role as a teacher, and what had I not done with Colin, and kind of this whole idea of kind of developing these other skills in young people, and how important it is that students learn about taking care of themselves, taking care of other people, being kind, listening, showing respect. All those things were things that Colin didn't have. And I realized, well, I think my role as a teacher is actually to go one step beyond academics. And then in Colombia, when I found myself in Colombia and working here, Colombia at that point was still going through the kind of negotiations towards the peace process. I think your listeners will know well that Colombia is a country with a lot of division, the very long civil war, a lot of inequality, a lot of mistrust. And therefore, this type of education feels particularly important in the Colombian context. If Colombia is going to be a different country, we need people to get on better with each other. And therefore, we need to educate people differently to how they've been educated in the past. And so developing empathy and trust and listening skills are vital for Colombia today and for the future generations of Colombia, if the country is truly going to kind of emerge from such a difficult period of its history.
You're very much on message, Henry. You said this before to someone, I think. You're very, very good at getting it across. So I have a very basic question for you then. I mean, my kids go to private school here, and I have been incredibly impressed with the sort of more holistic teaching that obviously my age group, I was born in 1976, so education was based on repetition and humiliation. And I am very happy to see my children going through something that's very different indeed. But my basic question here, Henry, is how do you, I mean, it might sound incredibly naive, but how do you teach empathy?
Yeah, so maybe you could start with the kind of the concept of, in school we learn languages, right? We learn Spanish, we learn English, French, Mandarin, and also today increasingly learn the language of programming, to how do you interact with computers and machines and so on. The whole kind of area of emotional intelligence is really about learning the language of emotions. It's about being able to explain and how are you, and talk about your feelings in ways that you, born in 1976, me, born in 1986, we weren't taught any of that in school. It was kind of, whatever, are you good? Are you bad? Are you fine? Whatever, carry on, And so if your kids today are having an experience where they're coming back from school and you ask them at the end of the day, hey, how are you? Like, how was your day? And they're like, do you know what, Dad? Like, actually, I'm feeling a bit kind of like frustrated, but also kind of optimistic at the same time. You as a parent, you're like, whoa, like I now know a lot more about what's happening inside my child, and therefore how I can respond to them. I mean, this phrase that we talk about a lot in my organization is from the philosopher Wittgenstein. He says, your language is the limit of your world. So if you have more language and you're able to talk about your feelings and your emotions, your world gets bigger and your possibility to connect with people expands. I mean, so that's like one small part of it. Kind of how do we learn this language like we might learn other languages, and how do we learn to understand the language and how to talk about it, and what to do with it. That's, I guess, a big piece of it. Yeah, and I mean, I could share other things as well, but maybe that's a good kind of one for starters.
Let's start with that one. But this is really, really interesting, and I've written a word down and underlined it twice. But it's like, how do you, again, teaching trust? This is a country where inherently people don't, and I will say this out loud, don't trust one another or organizations or institutions. And of course, you've seen this, having worked all over the place, and South Bogotá is no different really to other parts of the city in terms of this. To recover people's trust in one another, this is no small undertaking.
Yeah. Coschool actually began, and the name Coschool is based on this idea of connecting schools and connecting public schools with private schools. And in the first few years of Coschool, a lot of our programs were all about bringing together rich kids with poor kids and bringing together kids from different neighborhoods, different backgrounds. And something quite magical happens when you put kids together to do a project or attend a summer camp from different backgrounds. They're actually much better at getting on with each other and making things happen than adults are. They're less concerned with the clothes you wear, the car you drive, the phone that you've got. And so we found, you've got more chance of working on trust building with children when they're younger than you do with adults. So adults, it's much harder to change, certain views and things that are kind of more set in stone. And what in terms of like, how do you build trust? Kind of what is the antidote to or the recipe for building trust? Generally, it's like authenticity, vulnerability, being the truest version of yourself. So when someone asks you, how are you, cómo estás? Maybe you don't respond always in autopilot, kind of bien. You say, well, actually, I'm going to tell you how I really am, and I'm going to really kind of open up a little bit more, and therefore you're going to understand me a little bit better. And we crave vulnerability in others. We crave seeing what people are really like, and when we do, we trust them more. It's why we don't trust our politicians, because we think they're always bullshitting and they're just they're being fake. But when someone is kind of opens up, is truly themselves, allows us to see in a little bit, that's where trust occurs. So I guess like in how can we do that? How might we be able to develop those types of skills so young people today don't become kind of the adults that we all are today, which is we struggle to do that. But you can develop these skills when you're younger, and therefore you'll become adults that are easier to trust and more likely to trust other people.
I like that your daughter is or
yes,
son?
Daughter.
Yeah, our daughter is jumping around in the background. It's a fitting sound in the background of this. Well, of course, the children, when you put them together at a young age, and their prejudices that may have from whichever external factor, but they've not been established. But just as is in the UK, we have obviously elites, and we have a very marked class system in Colombia and a very marked strata system. As anyone will know who has traveled to Colombia or spent time here, it's split into 6 stratas, 1 being the lowest, 6 being the highest, and you are immediately identified and pigeonholed regarding your social strata. So it has to be incredibly difficult to work with on that, because and what were the statistics from, was it last year or the year before? Was it, I don't remember if it was The Economist or somewhere else, brought out statistics of how long it takes to sort of struggle out of poverty in Colombia. It's like 12 generations or something. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but these things are very much entrenched in society here. You are certainly fighting against the current.
Yeah, you could probably say that. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the Gini index, which is something that talks about inequality and how many generations. And yeah, I think it's 11 or 12 generations in Colombia as a country with such stark inequality. You've got to start on this stuff early and in early childhood education. That's when you've got the biggest chance of making a change that could last for the rest of someone's life. And there are reasons to be optimistic in Colombia. There are pretty strong policies and laws around early childhood education that have come into place in the last decade or so. There are new laws and policies promoting social and emotional learning, and this word convivencia, kind of how do we get on with each other in schools. I mean, if you can't fix it in education, then it's going to be difficult to fix kind of later in life. So that's why working on Coschool for the last 10 years has been such an interesting and fulfilling mission. There's lots of work to be done, but there's also quite a lot of appetite for this stuff in Colombia. And Colombia is curiously actually a bit of a global hub for this type of work around social and emotional learning. The OECD did a report last year in which they highlighted philanthropic investment in social and emotional learning initiatives around the world. And Colombia was the country which had the most initiatives reporting. So They launched the report in Colombia. Yeah, and kind of highlight Colombia as, hey, Colombia is a country with lots of things going on and lots of positive programs and initiatives and mindfulness in schools, and this program called Aulas en Paz, the work that Coschool is doing. And so there are promising kind of green shoots, I would say. But yeah, we are starting, against a pretty tricky backdrop and with certain forces kind of definitely weighing against us, but that's kind of that's a fun challenge to try and solve.
Well, that's it. I mean, we take on these projects because we believe that we can do these things and make some sort of a difference. Is it the key word that people would use was Colombia has been a laboratory? Is that what they sort of call it? Laboratorio. Yeah. So
yeah,
this is really interesting. You've been doing Coschool now, you say, for 10 years. 10 years is that's enough to really see fruits of your labors. I would say so, because you've been able to. I don't know. When you're doing things with Coschool, you're obviously directly involved with teachers and students. And 10 years later, you have to have seen the shoots of change and progress.
Yeah, I recently bumped into a young man called Juan Manuel. Pretty like crazy moment. I got into a lift at AN University and saw this face. I was like, I know this guy. He kind of looked at me, and then we locked eyes, and he looked at me and he said, "Profe," like teacher. And I was like, wow. And Juan Manuel was actually a participant in the pilot program of Coschool when I think he was 10 years old. He was from a public school in Suba, and he now 10 years later had won a scholarship to study in AN University, one of the most prestigious universities. Like, it's a big deal, like in mechatronics or something. And like told me, and obviously like I was we got out of the lift, we had a chat, he told me about everything, I was blubbing, and like obviously it's not Juan Manuel may well have achieved that without our work or our support, but I guess knowing that we played a role in providing a space where he could develop other skills which help him to then get ahead in school and become a resilient and positive and thoughtful teenager, which then puts him in a good position to get into higher education. I mean, stuff like that. There are lots of nice stories, and particularly we have lots of kind of great stories of teachers and how teachers have kind of transformed the way that they teach, and that's really become our focus in recent years. How do we really build capacity in schools through training teachers and through training school leaders? And we have several schools now which are really transforming because of this type of work. And it's amazing to visit them, and they kind of they're places of vibrancy and life and joy, and kind of like as you would hope a school would be. And I think that this work is at the core of that.
So I think you should take the credit and enjoy the success story, because otherwise, obviously, existentially you shouldn't, but at the same time, this helps you continue. This helps you know that you're in the right direction. You're doing the right thing. Of course, you need to celebrate these moments and see a child, let's say 10 years later, in a university, having won a scholarship from a family that probably first generation to ever attend a university. This is social change. I think those of us who sort of work in, and I don't put myself in your category at all. My little thing was for economic stimulus in Montpos, but when you see change, and when you see, like, for example, in tourism, when we see the trickle down for the ladies who cook food in the plaza at night, then saying that their kid has been able to go to technical college or so on and so forth. This is a good thing. This is a good thing. What I'm curious about is, if we go back, and you said you were in South London, I'm imagining like Peckham or somewhere. That's what I'm imagining.
Camberwell.
Yeah, so right. Yes. And then you were in South Bogotá. Obviously they're very different, but did you make comparisons, or did you see similarities between the two places? Because there are challenges,
Yeah, I mean, there are similarities for sure. I think that's what kind of drew me to it. I thought maybe Colombia would be very different, and then I came and you go into a school and you're like, wait, there's problems in the school. The kids are bullying each other. They're not being nice to the migrant kids that just arrived. In South London, you have, the kids would call each other they would call each other fob, which meant fresh off the boat, for the kids that had recently arrived. So there was this whole thing around kind of like not being nice to the new kids that arrived. Same thing goes on in South Bogotá with the kids from Venezuela, the division you have, and so on. Gangs, microtráfico, like the kind of the micro supply of drugs, and kids dropping out of school, kids fighting, like there's pretty similar stuff. And so I guess like I kind of weighed it up and thought, well, why not stick around here for a while and see if I can be useful and share some of my experience from London. And now I've got way more years experience than I do in Colombia than I do in London. So now I don't really know that much about what's going on in the UK education system, but I know plenty about what's going on here.
Yeah, and I don't know in the UK, but I know in the US, in some schools they have almost like metal detectors to go in and so on. Was that employed in South London as well?
Yeah, South London had a particular issue with knife crime, and I think still does. We had a member of the police full-time in the school.
Wow.
And we had kids who would bring knives in. We once had a kid that brought a gun in, things like that. It was quite dicey, I'd say. The level of violence and the type of violence is probably even more extreme than Colombia. I haven't felt unsafe in a school in South Bogotá, but in South London, I think I felt like genuinely like something might happen, and someone might put a knife in me. So
the issue of knife crime in the UK is of real concern, and that's the understatement here. But kids, I just consider, as you say, micro trafficking. We do read about a fair amount of that here taking place in the schools. I did a lot of investigations in Los Martires in Santa Fe, and I was down there a lot. And one of the schools was known for the jibaros and the dealers standing by holes in the wall and pushing little packets through. And I mean, I'm sure it happens everywhere, but it just conjures up that total violation of the safe space of a school for children. And what has been one of the sort of experiences that has most, I don't know, let's say traumatized you here in a school in Colombia?
Oh, that's a good question. Because we've worked in some of the toughest schools in Bogotá, in Cali as well, in like the Aguas Blancas
I know it.
Neighborhood, Urabá in northwest Colombia, a post-conflict region. I'd probably say, yeah, the stuff that goes on in Urabá, the more rural you get, the more kind of off the beaten track you get in Colombia, the more sketchy things become. And so we've run projects in Urabá which have had to get paused or shut down because armed groups have started to threaten, the kids in the project, or certain kids are getting notes pushed under their door saying, you come to school tomorrow, you're dead, you got to join us or you're dead, a lot of threats and a lot of kind of battles for control of what are effectively strategic towns along the export routes for the drug trade in Colombia, and Urabá is within that category. And so when stuff like that has happened, I mean, yeah, you remember that we're running an organization in Colombia, and this stuff is still going on in Colombia, and there are some pretty nasty people and forces at work that really are far beyond what we can deal with or manage with, and you have to just kind of follow the advice of police, of the school. And so some projects in Urabá we've had kids that have received threats and things like that. That's, I think, pretty scary.
That's terrifying, and the whole spectre of child recruitment, which continues on the rise today, is something that is so just incredibly vile, and it's hard to get your head around it. And as you say, rural Colombia, especially somewhere like Urabá, which is very much a strategic point. For those of you who don't know, draw a straight line from Medellin up to the huge bay that borders alongside Panama and Darien, and then there's a huge bay called the Bay of Urabá. That's that region up there, which is very strategic for the transshipment of drugs, migrants now, obviously for the introduction of arms, weaponry, and so on. It's just one of those places, unfortunately. And as you said, there's just a reality where if you and your team are ever at risk, you're going to have to step back. You're going to have to pause. So it's just one of those realities. It's all incredibly admirable and, phenomenal, really, what you're doing. I think perhaps maybe one of the biggest challenges that you faced was getting your foot in the door to become like an official, let's say, social or educational outlet that is then you are approved by the Colombian Ministry of Education, I assume.
We're not an official education or entity like a school or university might be by the Ministry of Education, but we have a good working relationship with them. We've done projects with them and so on. Yes, getting a foot in the door. I would say we're still getting a foot in the door. Maybe we've got a toe in there. We've just, after 10 years, we're just starting to do a first kind of proper project at scale with the public sector. It's taken us 10 years to get to that point where it's like the public sector, in this case, the Secretary of Education of Bogotá, that managed 400 public schools in Bogotá, have said, we want to work with you. We trust you. We know the work that you do. You're kind of going to be a key partner for us. And so we're starting to work in initially 50 and hopefully in all 400 schools in the next few years. But we had at the beginning of our lives as an organization, we did some work with the Secretary of Education in Chocó. Chocó is the most corrupt part of Colombia, generally one of the poorest parts of Colombia. And we did a great project, went really well. And then we were kind of set up to do another project, kind of to grow what we were doing into 5 other schools in Chocó. And the project was all ready to go. We'd spoken to the Secretary of Education. Everything was lined up. This was the budget. This is where we're going to do it, talking to the schools. And then just at the last minute, someone from the lawyer's office in the Secretary of Education raised a flag and said, you know what? I don't think we can hire these people. I think we're going to have to turn this over and do a public licitation. And so we were like, well, okay, we'll do the public licitation. But that public licitation turned into effectively a farce, in which the project was won through corruption. It was a very straightforward case of another organization who had nothing to do with with education and the type of work we do, slipping an envelope. And I know that this is something someone in the Ministry of Education told me that this is what he saw. An envelope was given to the lawyer behind closed doors, and miraculously, that company were awarded the contract and told to deliver this project that we had spent 6 months planning and doing a pilot of. They then had the cheek to ring me up and say, "Oh, we won this project. Like, we don't really know what it's about. Like, can you help us execute it? Can we hire your team?" Which is obviously like, oh my God, like, what? This is a circus. I mean, yeah. So that incident actually nearly torpedoed the whole organization at a very early stage, because we had kind of hired a team, we were ready to go, and then it's like, no, pull the plug on that. So we had to let go half of our team. It nearly kind of bankrupted us. So yeah, we've come face to face with corruption, unfortunately, and therefore been very wary of working with the public sector since then.
Of course. It was in Quibdó, in the capital of Chocó.
Yeah. Quibdó was where the Secretary of Education's office was, and where the dealings took place.
Yeah, it's known, unfortunately. And I was going to say, as soon as I heard you were angling into that, I knew where it was going, because obviously I've been located here a long time, and I was going to go, well, where does the CVY come in? The CVY or the Como voy yo? As in how am I? Where do I benefit? In the terms of the lawyer, for example, the Como voy yo tax. I could see that coming. I'm currently, I obviously can't talk about it, but I'm currently, battling something, not in the education, but certainly in the tourism sector. I'm currently battling something, and frankly, I don't want to make any payments with an envelope, and I have lawyers and so on, but it's exhausting. It's exasperating. It leaves you emotionally drained. You had 6 months of working on this, letting your staff go. It's investment lost, time, and you clearly put your heart into this. So that kind of leads me to you obviously have investors who've helped set up Coschool. How do you respond to them when this happens?
Well, at that stage, we didn't really have investors, but somehow we, after that, we have managed to convince investors to invest in us. Investors like Acumen and Bancolombia, Fundación Bancolombia, the biggest bank in Colombia. They're investors in Coschool. We're a for-profit company. We're a B corporation. We're kind of a social impact company. I wish we had been able to make more profit. We haven't made much, if any, yet, but hopefully we can become a kind of a successful, profitable business in the future, in the next 10 years. But I think that because we've convinced them and managed to get investors on board, and we've had funding from Gates Foundation and Templeton Foundation and Botnar Foundation. I think because we are, I think we're an organization with a lot of integrity. Like we're definitely not a corrupt organization, and we do things the right way. We are focused on trying to reach public schools and trying to reach post-conflict areas, and focused on trying to improve education and close these gaps that are so big in Colombia. and we try to measure effectively the work that we do, and we try to communicate well what we're doing, and we try to also play a role of lobbying government and kind of pushing the whole kind of issue of the importance of this at a national level. And so we've got some partners on board, but always open to more and can always do more. So if anyone's listening and wants to get involved, then get in touch with me.
Well, what's your website for people out there?
It's coschool.co. So it's coschool.co.
Well, we'll throw that up all over social media for you. You see, the thing I said, this is incredibly altruistic. I'm glad to hear it's for profit, despite maybe not turning a profit. But these things have to be economically viable and sustainable. Otherwise, how are you going to live? How are you going to pay your staff and so on? It must be so frustrating at times when you say, you genuinely believe in what you're doing. You've seen the fruits and the success stories, like Juan Manuel, I think you said it was Juan Manuel, and so on. And then you hit that brick wall of corruption, or someone within the Ministry of Education just saying, no, there's no money, or no, we're not interested. It's got to be hard because you're. Have you ever combated though? So have anyone like in academia come up at you and went, "Oh, this is typical neo-colonial London superior. You're coming over here and trying to impose your beliefs on us." Have anyone come up to you with that sort of attitude?
A few comments over the years for sure, and I think as something I'm very aware of, that my privilege as a British white man, in a country where we look at the top names of the top private schools, the Anglo, the Colegio Gran Bretagna, the Buckingham, Victoria schools, there is a natural kind of respect or affiliation with Britain, British people and education that has undoubtedly been something that has been useful to me and probably opened some doors for me that it might not have opened or wouldn't have opened if I was a black woman from Mccoll. So I'm aware of like that privilege and of the importance throughout Coschool's growth and evolution of this not being a kind of a British guy with British ideas kind of building a British company in Colombia. We're a Colombian company. 90% of our staff are Colombian. We are building with and for Colombia and Latin America. So if people do throw that criticism at me, I think I can say, well, look at the work that we do, look at how we operate. This is not the kind of the white savior kind of phenomenon of maybe other aid programs, of the 80s and 90s of let's go over there and help out the poor Latin Americans or the Africans. And, this is pretty different to that. But I'm aware of like I can't escape the fact that, British, male, white, all this stuff is there and is kind of part of our identity, but just try and embrace it.
We do, and we do get afforded greater leeway for all of the reasons you mentioned. I remember once a neighbor in Mccoll said I should have called the first hotel La Casa del Inglés, like the Englishman's house. And I said, I don't want to. I just don't want to. But it was one of those things that it was a suggestion, of course, that it would give it like a superior labeling. Marketing thing, and I really didn't want to. So, your work really it's an empowerment and education of teachers and students. So you're giving the know-how for then the teachers to go on and teach, so you can then move on. And it was Paul Theroux in his the old, I think it was the Dark Star Safari book, where he goes through Africa 20 years or 30 years after he went through the first time, meeting up with many of the same people and so on, and he laments is that there is now a practice of waiting for the handouts for the next group to come in, whereas rather than training up local people to then be able to move forwards, they're just waiting for the next thing. And it can be so very disheartening on that level. Of course, he's far more eloquent and puts it in such an impacting way. Now, you've become quite the celebrity of late. You were on a podcast, and forgive me for not knowing his name, but a very famous Colombian actor who I've seen in at least a dozen movies and TV shows. What is his name?
Juan Pablo Raba.
That's it. And he's a sex symbol for I would say what we used to say when we were at university. There was I didn't do a lot at university in my undergrad, but apart from watching a lot of daytime television and there was always a plethora of cooking shows, and there was one chef there that we used to refer to as the housewife's favorite. I would say that Juan Pablo Rala is possibly a housewife's favorite.
But he's a handsome guy.
Yeah, exactly. But he brought you on to talk all about this. So I mean, this is breaking down barriers as well. This is a new level of acceptance and I would say total adoption to Colombia. It's got to feel pretty good.
Yeah, and Juan Pablo's podcast is all about men's mental health, quite a new age taboo topic. And he's getting on his podcast, the leading kind of male Colombian celebrities, the actors and the TV stars and athletes and other people to talk about this issue. I think it kind of represents the thing I mentioned of the Colombia being a laboratory, and actually there is quite a lot of kind of promising stuff going on in Colombia. And well, I guess he's also he's leading the way and doing great work. And it was pretty fun to go on his podcast and hopefully it continues to grow. It's been really successful. That podcast is really definitely in the last few months.
So famous academics, famous healthcare, and a famous social entrepreneur, Henry May. There you go. So I'm
very much the smallest name on there, but very very happy to have been on there, and it's been cool because it's led to a couple of good conversations and good connections.
Henry, let me take this moment and say I'm kind of overwhelmed and speechless as to the work you are doing. It really is quite incredible.
That's the emotional intelligence at work, you see.
Well, you see,
expanding your vocabulary.
I think I hope I've got a decent vocabulary. I mean, as a journalist, I hope I can vary it. But I think that over the years, yes, there was a lot of untangling, let's say, educationally based trauma from my past. I'm not saying physical abuse or anything, but the way it happened, because there was so much about just suck it up, get back out there and play, when I smashed my knee in playing rugby and so on, which now today creates, as I near 50, creates problems for me. But there was so much of that. I remember once lots of us crying as small kids because our feet were so cold because there was no heating in a room that we had. It was a classroom, in the wintertime in the snow and stuff, and children were crying from it. So these things, I think there's a lot to be said. And I imagine you say you may not know what's going on in UK education, but there is certainly a great big debate about our politicians and their education, in particular the Conservative Party, and how they came through a lot of very similar and scarring experiences. I think you'd do well maybe to do a workshop with the opposition in the British Parliament right now, the UK Parliament right now. You'd probably have a lot of men breaking down and crying for their past. But let me say, I digress. Let me say thank you so much for your time and sharing this remarkable success stories and how it really came about. I mean, that horrific, tale of Colin right back there in Camberwell, killing someone aged 15, and therefore it puts your life on a different path. I mean, that was definitely one of those bifurcations in the road. It was, what am I doing? And I think this has been a fantastic conversation. So thank you again for your time and for sharing the success stories of Coschool. Everybody out there, do look it up, coschool.co, as in Colombia, CO. Of course, we'll put that on the Facebook page and Instagram and so on. But Henry, is there anywhere else you'd like to direct people, or just the website?
No, people can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram. You know, I'm fairly easy to find. Henry May, like the month of May. So yeah, always happy to connect with people that are passionate about the same causes and about making Colombia an even better place.
That's cool. So I will see you over the weekend at our respective children's swimming classes. But thank you again for your time. We've been speaking to Henry May here on the Colombia Calling podcast. Of course, get in touch if you'd like to hear from someone on the Colombia Calling podcast. Anything Colombia related. Remember, we are just a lens for the subject that is Colombia, the country that has adopted us. And of course, that we are happy to be in. So thank you again. And of course, tune in next week. Goodbye.